It was supposed to be just another glamorous night in fashion, flashing lights, applause, diamonds worth more than small countries. But one moment at the 2025 CFDA Fashion Awards stopped everything cold. Cameras froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. And the woman at the center of it all wasn't a designer or a model. It was Meghan Markle, standing awkwardly under 1,000 flashes, her hand half raised as Rhianna, the undisputed empress of effortless cool, walked right past her without a glance. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. People didn't need microphones to feel the tension. The silence said it all. No smile. No nod. Not even the polite kind of acknowledgement celebrities fake when the world's watching. Rhianna simply turned her head, muttered something that witnesses swear sounded like, "I don't know her," and kept walking. The internet exploded within minutes. Did Rhianna just snub Meghan Markle? Was that shade? What did Meghan do this time? You could almost hear the algorithms cheering. Because in today's celebrity world, where every public gesture is dissected frame by frame, this was the kind of drama that doesn't need context to go viral. It just needs two famous faces and one very visible refusal. But the truth? The real reason Rhianna refused that photo runs deeper than the glitter and gossip. And it isn't just about a single awkward red carpet moment. It's about power, authenticity, and what happens when the public finally sees through a performance. So what really happened that night? And why does this story matter so much right now? Let's rewind the clock. The CFDA Fashion Awards have always been about more than clothes. They're a mirror of who's in and who's out in the cultural elite. It's the Oscars of fashion, the place where reputations are made and destroyed by a single glance or headline. Rhianna, a regular, wasn't just attending. She was presenting. Meghan, on the other hand, was fighting for relevance. After years of what critics call PR overexposure and Hollywood fatigue, she had been trying to stage a comeback, a new image, a new narrative. The night was supposed to be her big return to high society. Instead, it became the night that reminded everyone just how far she'd fallen. Imagine the scene, marble floors gleaming, the soft hum of champagne conversations, Rhianna gliding through in a sculpted Balenciaga gown that looked like it was made for her and only her. Meghan stood nearby, radiant but tense, rehearsed smile in place. Her publicist gave her a subtle nod, the cue for the perfect photo opportunity. A moment that would, in theory, reinsert Meghan into the circle of cultural royalty she once believed she belonged to. But Rhianna didn't bite. She didn't even blink. She walked past as though Meghan was invisible. Some guests gasped. Others pretended not to notice. And the few who did catch it on camera created the spark that would ignite a digital wildfire. Now here's where it gets strange. According to several people present, Rhianna's refusal wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate, planned, even symbolic. Because when she said, "I don't know her," she wasn't just echoing Mariah Carey's legendary shade. It was, insiders say, her way of drawing a line. A quiet declaration that some brands, especially those built on borrowed glamour, don't deserve her spotlight. But why? What could have pushed Rhianna, of all people, to make that kind of public statement? Let's be honest, Rhianna isn't one for petty drama. She doesn't chase relevance. Relevance follows her. She built Finney from scratch, turned herself into a billionaire on her own terms, and has always been praised for keeping her distance from Hollywood's shallow games. Meghan, on the other hand, built her entire post-royal brand on media proximity, Netflix deals, interviews, documentaries, and endless reinventions of her truth. One woman built a business empire on authenticity. The other, critics argue, built an empire on narrative control. That's where the clash begins. And maybe, just maybe, Rhianna's refusal was the moment when authenticity finally snapped back at artifice. But we'll get to that. First, we need to understand the context, the buildup that made this snub not only inevitable, but explosive. You see, for months leading up to that night, whispers were circulating through Hollywood. Whispers that Meghan's charm had worn thin, that A-list circles were quietly pulling away, that what used to be royal mystique was now just exhausting PR fatigue. Some even claimed publicists were warning clients, "Stay clear of Meghan. It's not worth the headlines." Yet Meghan showed up at CFDA like a woman trying to prove the world wrong. She wore a shimmering silver gown, custom, understated but deliberate. The kind meant to signal humility wrapped in luxury. She smiled at cameras, played the part of the misunderstood heroine reclaiming her grace. But the problem with performances is that sometimes the audience has moved on. When Rihanna arrived, everything changed. The crowd subtly shifted. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. She has that kind of gravitational pull. You can't fake that. And as Meghan leaned forward, perhaps expecting a warm greeting or even a quick pose together. After all, both are women of color in an elite industry. Rihanna's cold sidestep was like a lightning strike. It wasn't just a rejection. It was a message, and Meghan knew it. Now, most of us have faced rejection at some point. A handshake left hanging, a conversation ignored. But imagine it happening under the glare of every camera in the world. Meghan's face, though expertly composed, couldn't hide the flash of confusion, then realization. She quickly recovered, turned toward another guest, and smiled like nothing had happened. But the damage was done. Within minutes, the internet had done its thing. TikTokers slowed down the footage, zoomed in, analyzed lip movements. Commentators called it the snub of the decade. Others said Rihanna was simply protecting her peace. But a small handful of insiders knew the truth, and it had nothing to do with fashion rivalry. Because here's the thing, Rihanna doesn't make public statements by accident. Every move, every silence, every quote, or in this case, every non-quote, is intentional. And what she did that night wasn't spontaneous shade. It was a reflection of something that had been brewing for years between her, Meghan, and the world of celebrity politics. Let's pause for a second. Why would one of the most respected, self-made women in entertainment refuse to even stand beside Meghan Markle, a Duchess-turned-Hollywood figure, at a public event meant to celebrate inclusion and creativity? Was it ego? Was it something Meghan said or did? Or was it that Rihanna, like so many others in Hollywood, had finally seen enough? By now, you're probably wondering, what exactly did Rihanna know? What had she heard? What made her so sure that being photographed beside Meghan wasn't worth the PR boost? We'll unpack all of that. The leaked texts, the quiet warnings, the subtle Hollywood distancing that's been happening for months. But before we get there, you need to understand why this single moment carries so much symbolic weight. This wasn't just a celebrity snub. It was a cultural snapshot of what happens when the world stops believing your narrative. Because Meghan's story, once seen as the fairy tale of a modern woman escaping the confines of monarchy, has slowly twisted into something else. Over time, her public battles, her interviews, her speeches about being silenced have begun to ring hollow for many. Her allies have grown quiet. Her ventures, from the Netflix docuseries to the podcast, haven't had the impact she promised. And as she's worked to maintain the image of empowerment, the whispers of disconnection and calculation have only grown louder. Rihanna's moment of refusal, just a few seconds of hesitation captured forever, summed up that entire transformation without a single word. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Some say the two women had crossed paths before, long before the CFDA Awards. At a charity gala years earlier, back when Meghan was still basking in the glow of royal life and Rihanna was cementing herself as a fashion mogul. Sources claim the encounter didn't go smoothly, that there was tension, subtle but unmistakable. One insider recalls Meghan allegedly trying to dominate the conversation, dropping hints about shared causes that sounded rehearsed. Rihanna, they say, smiled politely but left early. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe it was the first spark of a boundary Rihanna vowed never to cross again. You see, in Hollywood, relationships are currency. Every alliance, every photo, every nod at an event, everything has a strategic cost. And when someone feels you're using them for optics instead of genuine connection, they remember. Rihanna especially remembers. And when she walked past Meghan that night, maybe she was just cashing in on a lesson she learned long ago. Protect your brand, protect your energy, and don't let someone else's chaos become your headline. Because, let's be real, Meghan's headlines follow her like a shadow. No matter where she goes, controversy is a step behind. And while that used to fuel her visibility, now it repels the very people she's trying to attract. Hollywood has a short memory but a long nose for bad publicity. They can smell desperation, and nothing kills glamour faster. Still, there's a part of this story that remains unexplored. Because while everyone focused on Rihanna's refusal, Very few paid attention to what happened next. The reactions behind closed doors, the quiet phone calls, the PR meltdown that followed. And that's where the real story begins. Because what Rihanna did that night didn't just humiliate Meghan, it exposed how fragile her public image really is. It showed that even in the world of power players and publicists, authenticity still matters. And that no matter how many interviews or orchestrated appearances you make, respect can't be bought. It has to be earned. So yes, Rihanna refused the photo. But she also ignited a conversation that's still burning weeks later. What does it mean when one powerful woman refuses to validate another? And what does it reveal about Meghan's standing in the industry that someone like Rihanna felt no obligation to play along? Was it personal? Strategic? Symbolic? The answer isn't simple, but it's coming. Because in the days that followed, a chain of events unfolded that no one could have predicted. Emails were leaked. Statements were drafted and deleted. Even fashion insiders started whispering about the real reason behind that red carpet tension. And when the truth finally began to surface, it painted a picture that was far more complex and far more damaging than anyone could have imagined. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What makes a room full of flashing lights suddenly fall silent? What makes celebrities, people who've seen everything, freeze mid-step, eyes widening, jaws tightening, as though they've just witnessed something forbidden? That's what happened when Rihanna walked past Meghan Markle at the 2025 CFDA Fashion Awards. It wasn't a stumble, not an accident of timing, not even one of those red carpet misunderstandings that tabloids blow out of proportion. This was different, intentional. The kind of gesture that doesn't just end a moment, it defines an era. And the strangest part? Every person there could feel it. The music kept playing, the flashes went off, but the air changed. You could feel the temperature drop. Meghan's hand, midair in that polite half-wave, hung there just a moment too long. Her smile, frozen for the cameras, faltered for half a second before she forced it back into place. Rihanna didn't even slow down. She glanced once, expression unreadable, and continued walking, her silver earrings catching the light like tiny daggers. People think celebrity drama happens in shouting matches, online feuds, or fiery interviews. But the most devastating moments happen in silence. And that night, silence said everything. The video hit social media in under 15 minutes. A fan account posted a slow-motion clip on X, formerly Twitter, captioned, "Rihanna just did what to Meghan." The video racked up 2 million views before the show even ended. By morning, it had exploded. TikTokers were dissecting it frame by frame. Influencers were giving body language breakdowns, and gossip forums were aflame with theories. Was it jealousy? Was it revenge? Or was it a public declaration that Rihanna didn't want to be associated with Meghan Markle's brand anymore? Let's rewind to the exact second before the snub happened. Rihanna was walking toward the step-in repeat, a backdrop for the press photos, when Meghan, standing a few feet away, leaned slightly toward her direction. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed casual, but insiders say it was planned. A prearranged accidental meet. Meghan's team allegedly tipped off photographers, telling them to be ready for a big female power moment between the two icons. But that moment never came. Instead, Rihanna paused briefly as if considering it, and then turned her head away. To everyone watching, it looked like pure ice. To those who knew the backstory, it looked like poetic justice. You see, Rihanna isn't the kind of woman who gets roped into someone else's publicity narrative. She's built a career on independence, on doing things her way. When she walks into a room, the energy shifts to match her, not the other way around. So when Meghan tried to craft a narrative around their shared presence, Rihanna cut the thread before it could even form. And here's the kicker. People inside the CFDA event later revealed that Meghan's publicist had spent days negotiating photo opportunities. One insider said they were trying to line her up with any major female figure. Rihanna, Zendaya, even Anna Wintour. They wanted one strong visual headline. Translation, Meghan wasn't there for fashion. She was there for redemption. But redemption, as she would soon learn, isn't something you can stage. Now imagine being Rihanna. You've clawed your way up from Barbados to billionaire status, revolutionized fashion with Finny, broken every stereotype thrown your way. And then someone with a history of media manipulation tries to use your image as a PR prop. What would you do? Exactly what Rihanna did. Refuse. In that moment, the refusal wasn't personal, it was principle. It was her saying, without words, I don't owe anyone my spotlight. But for Meghan, who'd spent years crafting her narrative as the modern, misunderstood royal breaking free from the system, that single gesture unraveled everything. Because when one woman refuses to play along, the illusion of control collapses. The online reaction was brutal. One clip zoomed in on Meghan's face right after Rihanna walked away. The caption read, "The exact moment she realized the world has moved on." Comments poured in by the thousands. She tried to look unbothered, but you can feel the awkwardness. Rihanna did what we all wish we could. Say nothing and still make a statement. Hollywood's done pretending. But while the internet roasted, Meghan's team scrambled. Within hours, a spokesperson leaked to Page 6 that there was no tension and that Meghan and Rihanna didn't cross paths due to timing. But the problem? The footage didn't lie. They had crossed paths, clearly, publicly, uncomfortably. And that's when the Whisper Network kicked in. People began calling stylists, publicists, makeup artists, anyone who might have overheard something at the show. What they discovered painted a much darker picture. According to one witness, Meghan had been advised beforehand not to approach Rihanna at all. Rihanna's team made it clear she didn't want to be used for optics, the source claimed. It wasn't hostility, it was a boundary. But Meghan pushed anyway, because that's what she does. She pushes narratives until they break. Another witness recalled overhearing Rihanna's assistant say, moments before the red carpet, "She better not try to stage anything. Rhee's not in the mood tonight." So when it happened, when Meghan stepped forward and Rihanna turned away, it wasn't an accident. It was the collision of two brands, two worlds, two definitions of power. And in that collision, Rihanna won. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. After the event, Rihanna was photographed leaving early, no interviews, no backstage mingling. Just straight to her car, flanked by security. But one of her longtime stylists allegedly posted a cryptic Instagram story that night. A black screen with the words, "Energy doesn't lie." Fans immediately connected it to the snub. Rihanna didn't confirm or deny it. She didn't have to. Because silence, once again, did the talking. Meanwhile, Meghan's night went downhill fast. Several designers who had initially agreed to sit with her reportedly moved tables last minute. One CFDA board member allegedly told a friend afterward, "It was uncomfortable. You could tell everyone was pretending not to see what happened." That's the thing about high society. It runs on invisible politics. Nobody says the quiet part out loud, but everyone knows it. And on that night, the quiet part was that Meghan Markle was no longer the darling she once was. Rihanna's rejection wasn't just personal, it was social, symbolic. A reflection of what so many in the industry had been thinking but hadn't dared to say out loud. Aligning with Meghan Markle doesn't elevate your image anymore. It complicates it. Let's talk about that complication. For years, Meghan's brand had been built on the idea of being misunderstood. The narrative was powerful. A woman of color surviving the coldness of the British monarchy, breaking free from an institution that tried to silence her. It was inspiring, until it started repeating. Until every story, every interview, every statement sounded like déjà vu. You can only cry, they tried to silence me, so many times before people start asking, who's still listening? Rihanna, in her own way, answered that question without saying a word. But this moment wasn't just about two women. It was about two archetypes, the self-made powerhouse versus the curated princess. One forged her empire through creativity and grind, the other through image and association. When they collided on that carpet, the audience instinctively chose a side. And here's where it turns emotional. For Meghan, that single rejection wasn't just another headline. It was a public reflection of what had been happening privately for months. Doors closing, invitations lost in the mail, collaborations stalling. Even former allies, those who once rallied behind her cause, had begun to distance themselves quietly. She could feel it that night. Every smile felt strained, every greeting shorter than the last. And when Rihanna turned away, it wasn't just the loss of a photo. It was the confirmation of a fear Meghan had been fighting for months, that her relevance was fading faster than she could spin it. Now, most people would retreat, regroup, and rebuild. But not Meghan. She smiled wider. She doubled down. She made sure the photographers still got her solo shot. Her gown perfectly poised, chin lifted high. But behind the lens, insiders say her team was panicking. They knew the footage would go viral before the night was over. They knew it would look bad. And the worst part, they couldn't control the narrative anymore. Because when Rihanna's involved, you don't get to script the story. The story writes itself. But there's a detail here that few people caught. Right before walking past Meghan, Rihanna was seen whispering something to her assistant. The cameras caught it partially, just a few words, no photo. And then, a quiet shake of the head. Some fans speculated she meant no photo because she wasn't ready yet. Others, who knew Rihanna's unflappable demeanor, believed it was directed specifically at Meghan's attempt to initiate. Either way, that two-word whisper became one of the most dissected phrases of the year. No photo, no collaboration, no cosign, no complicity. It was, in essence, Rihanna's quiet refusal to participate in a performance she didn't believe in. And maybe, deep down, that's what this entire moment represents. The death of performative allyship. Because Rihanna, who's been praised for her authenticity, wasn't about to lend her credibility to someone who had lost theirs. Yet what's fascinating is how much empathy this stirred among everyday people watching from their phones. Many saw in Rihanna's move a kind of bravery, setting boundaries in a world that constantly demands politeness, especially from women. Others felt it was harsh, unnecessary, even cruel. But whether you saw it as strength or shade, you couldn't look away. And that's why this moment shook fashion and Hollywood to its core. Because behind the glitz, it wasn't just about two women on a carpet. It was about a power shift. It was about what happens when authenticity collides with performance, and only one survives. Now, here's the part no one saw coming. While Meghan's PR team was frantically drafting statements to downplay the incident, a few industry insiders were already whispering about the real reason Rihanna refused that photo. It had nothing to do with ego, nothing to do with fashion politics. It was personal, but not in the way anyone expected. It dated back years. Before the royal wedding. Before Meghan's Netflix empire. Before the world even imagined the Duchess and the pop star crossing paths. There had been another event. Another encounter. Another night where words were exchanged, and one of those words, according to a witness, never left Rihanna's memory. And that word would come back to define everything that unfolded after. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the cameras didn't actually tell the whole story? What if, hidden behind those blinding flashes and forced smiles, something happened in the shadows of that red carpet that no one, not even the gossip blogs, fully captured? That's the part of the 2025 CFDA Fashion Awards that no one talks about. Not the lights, not the gowns, but those unfilmed moments in the corners of the room, where whispers moved faster than the photographer's shutters. Because while the world saw a quick clip of Rihanna walking past Meghan Markle with what looked like deliberate indifference, what really happened before and after that moment was far more calculated, far more layered. And, if you believe the insiders, planned from both sides. You see, cameras lie by omission. They show you the surface. But power? Power hides backstage. Let's go back to that night again. But this time, we're not watching from the press pit. We're following the teams. The handlers. The stylists, the assistants carrying two phones and a clipboard, pretending to look calm while everything is about to combust. Hours before the event began, the ballroom at Lincoln Center buzzed with nervous energy. Rihanna's team arrived early, efficient, no nonsense. Her lead stylist, her PR director, her security, they had everything timed to the minute. Rihanna doesn't do chaos, she does choreography. Everything from her lighting to her angles is calculated. Then came Meghan. Her arrival was late, by design. Meghan's team has a pattern. They call it the floating entrance, meant to ensure maximum visibility. Arriving late means you're guaranteed camera focus and social media attention. But that night, the tactic backfired. Because Rihanna had already claimed the room. When Meghan stepped out of her car, she expected the usual flurry, the gasps, the shouted "Duchess" from photographers, but the noise was muted. The crowd's focus was elsewhere. On Rihanna, inside, who had just stunned the carpet with an architectural silver gown and that trademark calm that says "I know exactly who I am." It's at that moment Meghan's publicist leaned in and whispered, "We'll get her on your side later. Don't worry." And that single sentence set the trap. Because behind the glitter, there was already tension, small, invisible, but undeniable. A quiet warning had circulated earlier that week from Rihanna's circle to several PR agencies. No joint photos. No setups. No brand alignments. Apparently, Rihanna's camp didn't want her image tangled with Meghan's, especially after a recent investigative piece questioned Meghan's Hollywood alliances and the authenticity of her charitable claims. Whether fair or not, the article cast a long shadow. And Rihanna? She wasn't about to get caught standing in it. So when Meghan moved closer that night, smiling, extending her hand just slightly toward Rihanna, she was walking into a situation that had already been decided against her. But here's where it gets darker. A member of the CFDA coordination team, someone who worked backstage, later revealed that Meghan's staff had allegedly reached out to event organizers 2 days earlier, requesting adjacent placement for Meghan during the group photo sequence. The idea was to have Meghan positioned next to Rihanna and Zendaya, two of the biggest draws of the evening. It would have been perfect optics, three powerful women redefining beauty and success. Only, Rihanna's team found out, and according to the insider, they made a single phone call that ended the entire arrangement. Move her, Rihanna's manager allegedly said. No proximity. And that's why, if you look closely at the seating chart photos that later leaked online, Meghan's name appears not beside Rihanna's, but 2 tables over, next to a sponsor representative from a skincare brand, far from the celebrity center. Coincidence? Maybe. But to those who know how these events work, nothing about celebrity positioning is coincidence. Then came the moment everyone saw, but what they didn't see was what happened seconds before that camera flash. Rihanna was talking quietly with designer Olivier Rousteing, laughing softly, when her assistant leaned in and pointed discreetly across the room. She's coming, the assistant said. Rihanna didn't look immediately. She took a sip of her drink, glanced at the mirror wall beside her, and only then noticed Meghan walking toward her direction. Witnesses say Rihanna's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in disbelief, almost like someone realizing a boundary was about to be tested. Meanwhile, Meghan's team was in motion. Her handler whispered to the photographer stationed on the left corner of the carpet, "Be ready for something iconic." They were seconds away from disaster, and no one in Meghan's camp saw it coming. As Meghan reached the intersection of the red carpet, she tilted her body ever so slightly toward Rihanna. It was subtle but intentional, a signal that she was opening herself to a photo. And that's when Rihanna looked directly at her, took a single step sideways, and turned her back to face another photographer. To an outsider, it looked effortless. To those who planned the moment, it was a masterclass in boundaries. And then came those 4 words that ignited everything. "I don't know her." They weren't shouted. They weren't said for the cameras. They were whispered. But several people heard it. A nearby stylist. A model waiting for her own turn to walk the carpet. A microphone from a nearby entertainment channel even picked up the faintest trace of the phrase under the background noise. "I don't know her." Cold. Dismissive. But not untrue. Rihanna doesn't know Meghan personally. Yet the delivery, calm and deliberate, was what turned it into a statement. The phrase traveled through the crowd like electricity. People started exchanging looks. Meghan froze for half a beat, realizing what had just happened. She adjusted her posture, smiled again, but the damage was done. In that instant, the power dynamic flipped. Meghan, once the center of royal and media fascination, now stood on the outside looking in. Now here's the part that didn't make it into the viral clips. After Rihanna walked off, Meghan's assistant pulled her aside into a quieter corner near the press lounge. Witnesses claim Meghan's face was pale, her jaw tight. "What just happened?" she asked quietly, almost to herself. Her aide stammered something about bad timing, about not taking it personally. But Meghan wasn't convinced. "That wasn't timing," she said. "That was deliberate." She wasn't wrong. Meanwhile, in a separate room, Rihanna's team was already debriefing. "We kept it clean," one of her managers reportedly said. "No confrontation. No mess." Rihanna herself said very little, just sat down, crossed her legs, and checked her phone. For her, it was already over. For Meghan, it was just beginning. Because as the night continued, more subtle rejections followed. Designers who'd promised to greet her at their tables suddenly became unavailable. The pre-planned backstage interviews she expected never materialized. Even one of the CFDA social media managers, who'd been asked to post a photo of Meghan's arrival, quietly replaced it with an image of Zendaya instead. It wasn't sabotage, it was avoidance. And that's when the whispers started morphing into rumors. One stylist who worked both with Rihanna's and Meghan's circles claimed that there had been tension dating back to a private fashion dinner years earlier. Meghan had allegedly commented on one of Rihanna's outfits, a comment that, though phrased politely, came off as condescending. Something about balancing boldness with royal refinement. It was said lightly, perhaps even jokingly, but Rihanna never forgot it. She doesn't play those games, the stylist explained later. You can joke about a lot of things, but not her authenticity. So when Meghan reappeared years later, hoping for alignment, Rihanna had already made her decision. No connection, no validation. Now, think about the psychology of that moment. Two women who have fought to define their public images. One through relentless self-creation, the other through calculated reinvention, meeting in a room where every glance is a currency. And instead of solidarity, there's rejection. What does that say about the world they live in? Maybe it says that power, in modern celebrity culture, isn't about titles or money. It's about credibility. And once you lose that, no amount of royal history can save you. As the night went on, Rihanna's table became the epicenter of the room. Laughter, applause, flash photography. Meghan's table, meanwhile, sat quieter. Still polite, still smiling, but noticeably detached. By the time the awards ceremony began, the divide was complete. And then came one more humiliation, something no camera caught. During the closing photo session, when all the presenters and special guests were invited on stage for a group picture, Meghan's name wasn't called. Her PR team later claimed it was an oversight. But sources say otherwise, that her name had been quietly removed from the list earlier that afternoon. Why? No one would say. But one insider offered a single explanation. There were concerns about optics. Optics. The very thing Meghan came to control. She stayed in her seat, clapping with everyone else, pretending not to notice. But the truth was written all over her face. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was exclusion. By the time she left the venue, the media storm had already begun. The clip was everywhere, headlines multiplying by the hour. And Meghan's phone? Blowing up. Messages from friends asking what happened. PR consultants offering damage control. But nothing she could say would change what millions had already seen. Rihanna didn't need to explain herself. She'd said enough with 4 words. And yet, here's the twist. The story doesn't end there. Because as Meghan sat in her car that night, scrolling through headlines and watching her public image slip further out of her grasp, a text came through from an unknown number. 3 words. No signature. Told you so. Who sent it? A former friend? A rival? Or someone who knew what was coming next? That message would lead to a revelation that made the CFDA snub look tame in comparison. And when it surfaced, it wouldn't just expose a feud, it would rewrite everything we thought we knew about that night. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if I told you that the tension between Rihanna and Meghan Markle didn't start at the CFDA red carpet in 2025? That what the world saw, a brief sidestep, a whispered, "I don't know her," was actually decades in the making, shaped by subtle slights, misread gestures, and moments no one outside their inner circles had noticed? Before we can fully understand why that night ended in public humiliation for Meghan, we need to go back to trace the history, the backstory that nobody reported, the private encounters that foreshadowed the snub. Because this wasn't just a random collision of 2 famous women. It was the inevitable culmination of years of overlapping worlds and subtle friction. The first time Meghan and Rihanna were rumored to cross paths was in 2016, long before the royal wedding had captivated global audiences. Rihanna, already a global icon in music and fashion, had cemented her influence over both industries. She was daring, unapologetic, and commanding. Meghan, on the other hand, was emerging from the world of Hollywood television, her fame rising through roles in shows like Suits, but she hadn't yet stepped into the scrutiny that comes with marrying into royalty. At a charity gala in New York that year, both women were present, not for the cameras, but for philanthropy. On the surface, it seemed like a cordial meeting. Meghan approached Rihanna, introduced herself politely, and tried to engage in a conversation about shared causes. Witnesses recall Meghan emphasizing her interest in women's empowerment initiatives, using phrases she would later repeat in interviews. "We need to amplify women's voices, and I'm committed to making an impact on the world." Polite, professional. But insiders say there was a subtle undertone that rubbed Rihanna the wrong way. Why? Because authenticity, Rihanna has always argued, isn't performative. It isn't about what you say, it's about what you do. And in her estimation, Meghan's approach, though polite, smelled like strategy, an attempt to associate herself with a well-established cultural force. Rihanna reportedly gave her a polite smile, nodded, but excused herself shortly afterward. It was nothing dramatic in the moment, but someone close to Rihanna remembered it. And, as these things often do in elite social circles, it didn't fade, it simmered. Over the next several years, the two women's paths would overlap sporadically, always in professional spaces. Fashion shows, award ceremonies, charity events. Each time, Meghan's approach was reportedly similar, polished, charming, and intentionally high-profile. And each time, Rihanna maintained her distance. Nothing public, nothing confrontational, but a pattern was forming, quietly noticed by those working in fashion PR and celebrity circles. Meghan attempted visibility through Rihanna. Rihanna, meanwhile, chose disengagement. Contrast these approaches. Meghan's method is strategic, designed for optics, to generate narratives about influence, empowerment, and connection. Rihanna's method is deliberate detachment, letting her work, her projects, and her persona create influence without needing validation from others. This clash is more than personality, it's philosophical. One seeks recognition, the other defines her own space. And philosophy matters in Hollywood and the fashion world. By 2018, Meghan's transition into royal life added another layer. She went from being a rising Hollywood star to a global figure scrutinized under a royal lens. This shift transformed how celebrities like Rihanna would interact with her. A royal is not merely a person, they are a symbol, a brand. But symbols have baggage. And Meghan, as the world would later see, carried enough baggage to make interactions complex. One source who works closely with fashion insiders claims that Rihanna's team began flagging Meghan's appearances months before the CFDA event. The rationale: she's great, but her brand is unpredictable and the optics of aligning with her can backfire. It wasn't personal, the source insists, it was risk management. But from Meghan's perspective, it likely read as cold or exclusionary. That tension escalated quietly in 2019 during another private event in Los Angeles. Both women attended an after-party for a major fashion gala. The party was meant to foster collaboration, but witnesses report subtle tension from the beginning. Meghan tried to enter Rihanna's private circle within the party, introducing herself again and referencing previous charitable initiatives they had in common. Rihanna, according to insiders, barely acknowledged her, maintaining polite distance, speaking instead with her team and select industry peers. This incident, small as it was, would later resurface in rumors circulating among insiders. People in the fashion world remember moments like these. They're invisible in public, but they shape perception, influence alliances, and define who will collaborate with whom. Fast forward to 2020, the year Meghan's media presence exploded through interviews, podcasts, and streaming deals. Rihanna, meanwhile, launched Fenty Beauty globally, disrupting traditional beauty industry norms. By this time, Meghan's attempts at media dominance were clear: strategic interviews aimed at maintaining public attention, often referencing personal hardships and charity involvement. While the world applauded Meghan's openness, Rihanna's inner circle reportedly began signaling caution. To them, Meghan's reach wasn't threatening, but the method of achieving it, leveraging connections, inserting herself into events, and publicly crafting associations, was predictable and manipulative. By 2022, their overlapping spheres in fashion became unavoidable. Both women were listed as attendees for various high-profile industry events. Observers noted Meghan's persistent attempts to position herself near Rihanna, often photographed in the background or posing in ways that suggested closeness, despite little evidence of personal friendship. Rihanna's PR team responded with quiet adjustments. Schedules changed, tables moved, seating altered. All subtle, all deliberate. And this is crucial. There is a psychological principle at play here. Humans, especially high-achieving women in competitive spaces, remember slights long after others forget. They calibrate interactions, consciously or unconsciously, based on past experiences. Rihanna had a long memory. Meghan, for all her charm and strategy, perhaps underestimated it. Which brings us to the crucial point. The 2025 CFDA Fashion Awards weren't happening in a vacuum. Every sidestep, every glance, every whispered word was built on a layered history stretching back almost a decade. The "I don't know her" moment wasn't spontaneous. It was the crystallization of that history. And yet, here's where it gets complicated. While insiders cite these encounters as tension-building, Meghan's narrative often painted her interactions with Rihanna differently. Publicly, she might describe attempts at collaboration or mutual respect. Privately, she may have expected acknowledgement, perhaps even admiration. But Rihanna, as she has always done, operates on her own terms. And for her, acknowledgement is earned, not requested. We can also consider the public perception angle. For fans and media observers, Meghan's repeated positioning near Rihanna looked aspirational, even strategic. For Rihanna, watching that pattern repeat across years, it likely felt invasive, an attempt to leverage her aura for visibility rather than connection. And in celebrity culture, aura is everything. There's also a cultural layer. Both women are icons of modern womanhood in their own ways. Meghan embodies a blend of royal narrative and media-crafted empowerment. Rihanna embodies raw self-authored authenticity and entrepreneurial genius. When two such forces meet repeatedly, friction is inevitable, particularly when one seeks validation and the other avoids it. By the time they finally met at the CFDA, every previous interaction, every perceived slight, and every strategy from years past converged. That's why the cameras didn't capture the full picture. The cameras only captured the surface, Rihanna sidestepping Meghan. What they didn't capture was the psychological, professional, and historical weight of that moment. This is where many misunderstand celebrity drama. People see the visible gestures and immediately assume personal dislike or pettiness. But the reality is often deeper, more structural. It's about brand alignment, trust, authenticity, and perceived intentions. And those invisible forces can be far more powerful than a verbal insult or a heated confrontation. The history between Rihanna and Meghan is a textbook example of this. Repeated interactions, strategic missteps, differing approaches to power and authenticity, all culminating in a single, unforgettable sidestep on a red carpet. And yet, despite all this, Meghan's team seemed unprepared for the social fallout. Because the moment wasn't just about Rihanna. It was about the world watching, dissecting, and deciding what it meant for both women's legacies. The quiet tension of years became a viral spectacle in seconds. But here's the part nobody anticipated. A single conversation from years prior, a minor disagreement at a charity event, overheard words in a hotel hallway, was now circulating in insider circles, ready to explode into public scrutiny. And when that detail surfaced in gossip feeds and eventually mainstream media, it reframed the entire CFDA moment. It suggested that Rihanna's refusal wasn't just about optics or principle. It was personal, rooted in history, and meant as a statement. That revelation would change everything. And it wasn't just Meghan's image at stake. It was the perception of influence, respect, and power in Hollywood and fashion circles. Because when the layers of history emerged, the narrative shifted from a casual celebrity snub to a profound cultural moment. But what happened after the CFDA, behind closed doors, would escalate this from a viral clip into a story that no one, including Meghan, was fully prepared to handle. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when the world you've carefully curated starts to crumble? What do you do when the attention you've relied on, the fame you've built, and the influence you've wielded suddenly begins slipping through your fingers? That's the story of Meghan Markle's Hollywood journey in the years leading up to the 2025 CFDA Fashion Awards, and why the Rihanna snub hit harder than anyone could have imagined. By the time she stepped onto the Lincoln Center red carpet, Meghan wasn't just a former duchess attempting a comeback. She was a figure under scrutiny from every angle: critics, celebrities, industry insiders, and, most importantly, a public that had begun questioning the authenticity of her carefully constructed persona. Let's start with the basics. Hollywood is a world that rewards visibility, but only if visibility is combined with influence. Early in her career, Meghan understood this implicitly. A recurring role on a hit legal drama gave her a foot in the door. Media appearances, philanthropic endeavors, and savvy networking strengthened her profile. But once she married into royalty, she entered a new orbit entirely. Suddenly, her celebrity wasn't just about her acting. It was about symbolism, politics, and a narrative crafted for public consumption. At first, it worked. The world was captivated. Meghan and Prince Harry became the modern fairy tale, a story of love, defiance of tradition, and multicultural resonance. Hollywood and media circles were enchanted by her story. Invitations, collaborations, and endorsements poured in. The charm worked. She had influence. She had a narrative. She had power. Then the cracks began to show. By 2019, subtle missteps, real or perceived, started to erode her credibility. Critics noted an increasing reliance on media narratives to maintain her image. Interviews, while compelling, began to feel rehearsed. Every public appearance seemed carefully orchestrated. And in Hollywood, the line between being admired and being overexposed is razor thin. Once people begin questioning your authenticity, the cascade of skepticism can be relentless. This is where the term Hollywood freefall becomes relevant. Meghan, once celebrated for her poise and narrative control, found herself facing scrutiny not just from the tabloids, but from those she had once considered allies. Friends began distancing themselves. Industry insiders stopped returning calls. Collaborations stalled. And while social media still adored her, there was a growing chorus questioning whether she had truly earned her standing, or if she had been carried by fame, notoriety, and the allure of royalty. Consider her ventures post-royalty. The Netflix deal was groundbreaking, one of the largest contracts ever given to a celebrity couple, but it carried enormous expectations. Every show, documentary, and special was scrutinized not just for content, but for its reflection of character. Did she present herself authentically? Did the messaging match the reality? Critics were quick to point out contradictions between the stories she told publicly and her behind-the-scenes reputation. And every criticism, no matter how small, chipped away at the public's trust. The media loves a comeback story, but it thrives even more on a downfall. And Meghan's trajectory, once soaring, began feeding the narrative of decline. The public is unforgiving, particularly when celebrity is intertwined with symbols of authority and morality. In Hollywood, unlike royalty, there's no buffer against criticism. A misstep, perceived or real, can reverberate across careers. By 2021, Meghan's public image had become complicated. She remained admired for her fashion, her philanthropic efforts, and her public statements about gender equality, but there were whispers. Industry insiders described her as difficult, overly calculated, or detached from reality. Headlines questioned her relationships with former friends, her influence within Hollywood circles, and even the legitimacy of her public persona. Suddenly, the glamorous fairy tale narrative was colliding with reports of personal friction, strained alliances, and unfulfilled promises. Imagine the psychological toll of this. Someone accustomed to influence, visibility, and a curated image now encountering rejection, whispers, and public snubs. Every action is scrutinized, every misstep magnified. Hollywood, unlike the royal sphere, doesn't forgive easily. Influence must constantly be re-earned. And for Meghan, the process had become relentless. Then came the COVID years, which amplified the scrutiny. Social media became a double-edged sword. While it allowed her to directly engage with fans, it also opened the floodgates to criticism and viral commentary. Every outfit, every post, every public appearance was a potential headline, a potential meme, a potential trend. And when the public and media began perceiving a dissonance between her public statements and private actions, the scrutiny intensified. By 2023, some insiders were describing her as isolated within Hollywood. Key collaborators, celebrities she had once worked closely with, were reportedly hesitant to engage. The reasons were subtle. Her team's overmanagement of appearances, perceived manipulation of narratives, or simple fatigue with the consistency of her storytelling. Social media amplified every minor faux pas, and traditional media dissected her every move. This wasn't just gossip. It was a systemic challenge to her authority, her image, and her perceived influence. Which brings us to the 2025 CFDA Fashion Awards. The snub by Rihanna wasn't merely a single red carpet moment. It was emblematic of a larger pattern. Hollywood, in its quiet but powerful way, had begun distancing itself. Invitations were still extended, but behind the scenes, decisions were being made to limit visibility, minimize exposure, and avoid unnecessary entanglements. It wasn't personal, at least not in the conventional sense, but the effect was the same. Meghan found herself increasingly on the periphery of the very circles she hoped to dominate. Think about it from a psychological perspective. Rejection in a professional context is challenging, but in public, under the gaze of millions, it becomes an existential evaluation. Meghan's every attempt to assert influence, to reclaim relevance, was scrutinized against an invisible metric of credibility and authenticity. In short, the higher the stakes, the more unforgiving the world became. And there's another dimension: celebrity allegiances. Hollywood operates on relationships built over decades, often subtle, often invisible. Invitations, collaborations, and opportunities are extended not just for talent, but for trust, dependability, and perceived authenticity. A single misstep, or even a perceived one, can erode years of credibility. Meghan, in this sense, was navigating a delicate ecosystem where a single misread interaction could ripple outward, influencing how designers, actors, directors, and brands perceived her. Which is why Rihanna's sidestep was so devastating. It wasn't just a rejection of a photograph. It was a rejection of the narrative Meghan had been building for years, that she belonged in Hollywood's inner sanctum. A gentle word, a smile, a nod, anything, would have provided the subtle validation she craved. But the absence of acknowledgement sent a signal louder than any headline. Influence isn't granted by title or history. It's earned through presence, authenticity, and alignment with peers who themselves command respect. For Meghan, this wasn't just an incident. It was a mirror, a reflection of the slow unraveling of influence that she hadn't fully acknowledged. And Hollywood, always attuned to optics, saw it too. But here's where it gets even more dramatic. In the days following the CFDA Awards, leaked texts and private messages began circulating. Alleged exchanges between Meghan and her advisors revealed panic, frustration, and even desperation. One text, reportedly sent from her PR strategist to Meghan herself, said, "You need to recalibrate before it's too late." Another suggested last-minute efforts to secure post-event interviews, attempting to spin the narrative and mitigate the damage. Yet the damage had already done its work. The story had taken on a life of its own. The public had watched, analyzed, and formed opinions. Hollywood insiders had read between the lines. And for Meghan, the realization was stark. She had misjudged the dynamics, underestimated Rihanna's resolve, and miscalculated the delicate balance of celebrity alliances. Her Hollywood freefall, while subtle in its early stages, had reached a visible, undeniable peak. Every misstep, every rejection, every misaligned interaction contributed to a compounding effect that culminated in a single, unforgettable moment on that red carpet. The irony? Meghan, known for her calculated public appearances and narrative control, had been caught off guard by something entirely outside her influence, a silent refusal that spoke volumes. And yet, while this might appear as a personal setback, there's a larger lesson at play. Influence is fragile. Visibility without credibility is temporary. Fame without alignment is fleeting. And in Hollywood, just one miscalculation, one perceived slight, can trigger a cascade of professional consequences that reverberate far beyond the red carpet. Which brings us to the moment after the snub. Meghan, once so commanding in public perception, was left scrambling behind the scenes. Damage control attempts, internal meetings, strategy recalibrations. It was all reactionary. She had lost the initiative, and for someone whose career had depended on narrative control, this was a crisis of identity, influence, and survival. And that's not even the full story. Because while Meghan focused on managing optics and social perception, a quiet series of leaks, whispers, and insider revelations began to circulate, threatening to expose even deeper vulnerabilities in her Hollywood standing. The world had seen the snub. They had seen the reaction. But what they didn't see, what was about to surface, would change the narrative entirely. And when it did, it would become clear that Meghan's Hollywood freefall was far from over. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if I told you that red carpets aren't just for walking, they're battlefields? Every step, every pause, every turn of the head is calculated. And on the night of the 2025 CFDA Fashion Awards, the red carpet became a chessboard, with Meghan Markle and Rhianna unknowingly playing opposing sides in a game no one outside the inner circle fully understood. Red carpets are theatrical spaces. They are stages where celebrity, fashion, and power collide. Cameras capture fleeting moments. Social media amplifies them into global phenomena, and every gesture is instantly analyzed. But behind the glitz and flashbulbs, there is strategy. Every celebrity has a team plotting angles, timing, interactions, and optics. And sometimes, what seems like a simple photograph opportunity is actually the culmination of months of backstage maneuvering. For Meghan Markle, the 2025 CFDA red carpet was supposed to be her moment of resurgence. After years of both intense media scrutiny and controversial public appearances, she aimed to craft an image of calm, elegance, and relevance. She arrived in a carefully chosen silver gown that shimmered under the lights. Not too bold, not too subdued, a statement in itself. Her publicist had coordinated every detail, from the placement of cameras to her walking route, to ensure optimal coverage. Meghan wasn't just walking a red carpet. She was staging a visual narrative designed to reaffirm her prominence in Hollywood's elite circles. Rhianna, on the other hand, operates by a completely different rule set. Her approach to appearances is deliberate, self-contained, and unyielding. She doesn't need validation. Validation gravitates toward her. Her team, known for precision and discretion, ensured that she maintained control over her interactions and the images captured that night. While Meghan's strategy relied on proximity to other A-listers, Rihanna's strategy relied on absence when necessary, control through subtlety, influence without verbal assertion. As Meghan approached the photographers stationed along the carpet, she did what any high-profile celebrity would do. She scanned the crowd, smiled in practiced increments, and extended her hand toward Rhianna. The cameras didn't capture the brief hesitation that occurred when Rihanna's assistant subtly signaled her to step aside. This was a silent message, an invisible line drawn to prevent the narrative Meghan's team had planned. To the untrained eye, the interaction lasted mere seconds. But those seconds carried the weight of years of accumulated professional calculations, personal histories, and strategic alignments. According to multiple backstage sources, Meghan's attempt to initiate a photo with Rhianna had been discussed in pre-event strategy meetings. The goal was to showcase unity among powerful women of color, a statement of empowerment that would dominate social media headlines for days. But Rihanna's team had countered, quietly adjusting the positioning of both women without any public acknowledgement. This is where red carpet politics becomes intricate. Event organizers, photographers, and PR teams are constantly in communication, exchanging subtle signals about movement, timing, and interactions. A single step in the wrong direction, a hesitation, or a sidestep can create or destroy a narrative. And on this particular night, every calculated move worked against Meghan. The minute Meghan extended her hand, Rihanna's slight shift, barely perceptible, sent a message louder than any words could. It was a refusal without confrontation, a rejection without aggression, a statement without spectacle. Those who were present later described it as a masterclass in control, noting how Rihanna's minimal movement dominated the narrative, ensuring that every lens in the vicinity captured her composure while Meghan's intended visual narrative collapsed. But here's where it gets even more complex. The choreography of red carpets is as much about perception as it is about movement. Meghan's team had meticulously planned the angles from which photographers would shoot her, aiming to capture her interactions with other celebrities. By contrast, Rihanna's team preemptively adjusted positions to ensure she remained visually dominant in every frame. The intersection of these two strategies resulted in the viral moment that now defines the 2025 CFDA Awards. And while the public saw only the sidestep and whispered, "I don't know her," those in the room, stylists, assistants, PR representatives, knew the real story. The red carpet had already been won by Rihanna through subtle control. Meghan, despite all her planning, had been outmaneuvered in a way that left no room for recovery during the event itself. It's fascinating when you consider how much power exists in absence. Rhianna didn't confront Meghan. She didn't make a statement in words. She simply positioned herself, controlled the camera.